Okay.
Okay, our clerk is very, very close. We're about to get started here. Someone was just humming the Jeopardy tune. Was that you, Representative Lindgren, or Representative? And the reason that when I hear that sound, I will share that there are two members of this committee who actually appeared on the TV show Jeopardy. I was one of them, so when I hear that, I have flashbacks. The other representative was Representative Foss, who also appeared with Alex Trebek on Jeopardy. So that's a. Could you hear Representative Gagne humming that? Apparently, there was a time in the House where somebody was, and the speaker was very upset because
It was a backbencher. It had to be a backbencher.
they did not care for that tune, and so Representative Foss and I are having flashbacks, and so we would like to ask that the Jeopardy tune not be hummed in this body. Okay, we're going to start on time. Representative Mandelbaum is getting close, so I would ask Representative Bennett if you would lead us, as is our custom, in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have two bills today, two retained bills for state, federal, and veterans. The first one is HB 104 FN. We'll take that up first. The second one will be HB 256. HB 104, we retained. And before I do that, I want to welcome, we have two substate. Representative Smith, welcome to state, federal, veterans. Representative Newsom, glad you're here. So we retained this in January. Part of the rationale for retaining it at the time was we had a new administration coming into Washington. We had a new SecDef at DOD, new Secretary of Defense, DOW now, I guess, or WD, War Department. Thank you. So we wanted to, apparently the new SecDef, the latest Secretary of Defense, had made a number of statements in support of the concept of defend the guard. And we also wanted to see what was happening with some other states. That's always useful, or often useful. So at this time, we will get right to it. HB 104 FN, prime sponsor, Representative Tom Mannion. Representative Mannion, you have a motion for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I move OTP, and I do have an amendment.
Okay, so the motion is to move this forward with an amendment. Is there a second for your amending motion? Whose hand was that?
Give it to Larry.
No, skip.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Representative Mandelbaum, welcome. No one is happier than me to see you here.
Apologies for my.
So the motion by Representative Tom Mannion ought to pass on his amendment. The amendment, which you should all have in front of you. If you don't, I have some extra copies here. Representative, come on up. Okay, you're good? Okay. So the amendment number of Representative Mannion's amendment is 2025-3007H. That is the proposed amendment. It's been moved by Representative Mannion, seconded by Representative Gagne, or it was Rollins. Representative Rollins seconded that. So Representative Mannion, would you speak to your amendment?
Yes, thank you. So as we've seen from the graph from the other states, every state that has this, it can get, like a lot of states, it'll get through some chamber, it'll pass a lot of committees. What'll end up happening is it'll get pocketed vetoed by speakers or presidents of the Senate or whoever. They're all scared of the funding threat. I personally don't believe it, but we're in the realm of politics. So my fear is that we pass the bill out of the House again. It goes over to the other body. The other body says, well, nothing changed from the last time we killed this thing. Why are we going to pass it this time? And while I can argue till I'm blue in the face that I don't believe the funding threat. And after many phone calls with people at night arguing and debating this, I do think that this amendment here is borrowing from the concept of the Convention of States, more or less, that says strength in numbers, more or less. The idea is that if the bill passes, it will not immediately go into effect. It will instead go into effect once New Hampshire and 4 other states, or specifically Maine and Massachusetts, join us, and we basically make that leap together. As I said, I don't believe the funding threat is real, but a lot of people do. I do not believe that the Department of War or the National Guard Bureau will defund 5 states or an entire cluster of the Northeast just because we're saying we want Congress to do their job. And since this bill's objective is more or less pointing the finger at Congress already, that's why I thought the idea of modeling it after the Convention of States, which historically, when states have moved forward with the Convention of States concept, and like whatever it may be, the federal government will come in and say, well, we'll just write the amendment ourselves. So if we pass this and multiple states start following this template, it could be that the Congress says, this is very real. Several states are about to fire off and this is about to go into effect. Maybe we should rethink the War Powers Act, rethink AUMFs, and we should go back to, especially with the rebranding of the Department of Defense, Department of War, we should go back to the way the founders intended, where the war-making authority starts with Congress. So I think by passing this amendment, it basically says, it gives us a beachhead from which that we can wait for reinforcements of other bigger states, potentially Arizona, potentially Montana, potentially Texas, that will come behind us and help us get it across the finish line. But we will be out there like a scout force and as a small New Hampshire state and waiting for reinforcements.
Thank you, Representative. Before we go any further, I do want to, for the folks watching at home or who will be watching this, HB 104, we all know what this is, but if it's not clear to someone watching, this bill is on the bill, it's an act relative to requiring an official declaration of war for the activation of the New Hampshire National Guard in a foreign state. So that's what this act, what this measure, this bill HB 104-FN is all about. Representative Rollins, you seconded the measure of the amendment proposal. Do you want to speak to that?
For me on this amendment, whatever we can do to get this taken care of, I'm all in favor. I, as a Gold Star father who lost a son, never want to see another American boot on foreign soil ever again, unless we have a declaration of war or whatever. It's a tough thing. A lot of people are going to go in different directions. I have issues with sending our young men off to war and not being able to return fire when being fired upon. I think they should be open to return fire. We're putting them in very hostile situations with no ability to take care of themselves.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Seibert, did I see your hand up?
Yes. I'm sorry, the red means on. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Yes, so I wanted to address I still have an issue regarding, they pay for the training for our soldiers and they might not be able to use them. But ultimately, doesn't this come down to also the funding for, well, it seems to come down, I'm not asking the question, quite frankly, of the funding for the contracts in regards to that the people actively choose to sign. And if they are not fulfilling that contract, that would then be essentially null and void. I mean, that's the way contracts work. So that's what I see as, it's in their contract to be deployed if blah, 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 blah. And that's not the case. I just want to also add the point that the president has, in the Constitution, the president has executive powers. And specifically as commander-in-chief. Along with that, if Congress does step up and want to say no or yes to whatever the president says, the president then has the veto power to veto that. So, you know, we can go by what version of the Constitution we want to at any given time, but ultimately we have what's sitting there right now. And this comes down to a constitutional issue. This is also violating the people's right to sign these contracts in the first place. Many of them do it for many different reasons, whether it's to go to school. And if they're like 3.5 years into a 4-year contract and this goes into effect, what do they do? We don't know the answers to that realistically. And I don't think it's smart to play with people's lives when this imminently affects them.
So both Representative Rollins and Representative Seibert seem to touch on the broader issue of what's behind HB 104. I think we should, for the purpose of the amendment, which is fairly narrow, we'll get into the broader issues in a bit, but I want to make sure that we're focused on the narrower issue of the amendment that's before us before we get into some of the other parts of this. Go ahead, Representative Seibert.
Actually speak to that. Sorry. So yeah, since I'm fundamentally against the original bill, I just have to say that 5-10 years down the road, which is often not the mindset we legislate in, but I like to look at that possibility and say there is a legitimate conflict or threat taking place, where our security is definitely at risk, and this goes into effect, and all of a sudden we don't have 5 states worth of our military. What do we do? And that could be a very dangerous situation. It's also leads to just simple instability, which is not good. So yeah, I'm finding if I'm against the underlying bill, I just can't be for this amendment. So especially with all the unknowns, we consider and say, well, we're sure, but where do we have the proof? So
Thank you, Representative. Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you would just indulge me for a minute or two, I'd just say the full piece so I won't speak again on the underlying bill because it's all pertinent to this amendment as well. So the Militia Act, aka the Dick Act, which founded the National Guard, it was a progressive era reform explicitly designed to erode federalism and centralize authority in Washington, D.C. It violated both the Constitution and the law of non-contradiction by labeling the constitutional state's militia as being the militia, but also not the militia at the same time. And it has never been adjudicated at the Supreme Court. The standing army is not the militia. That is a wholly different constitutional provision. Only Congress, by the Constitution, retains the authority to call up the militia of the several states to send them to war. The president has authority. He can call up the militia to put down insurrection, to enforce domestic law, and to repel invasion. Those are authorities of the executive, but only Congress can send the militia to war. Yet this act simultaneously calls them the militia, but also the active duty military, which gets around that constitutional provision by giving the president supposedly the unilateral authority to call up the Guard, make them no longer the Guard, no longer the militia, but now active duty, to send them overseas to fight. There is no legal authority for the president to be able to do that. So it violates the 10th Amendment. It upholds the reforms of the progressive era as legitimate, and it inflicts casualties on units that ought to be reserved for defense here at home in the several states. So the Defend the Guard bill, as introduced, is supported by Senator Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, Director of National Intelligence Gabbard, and Secretary of War Hegseth. And while I very much appreciate the intentions of the amendment and the gentleman who brought it forward, I am concerned that the amendment violates the principle underlying the original bill itself. So this is not an authority of several states together, an alliance of states, because the federal government itself is an alliance of states, and this is not a federal authority. This is authority reserved to the state itself, the state of New Hampshire, under the federal government. If we give this authority via this legislation to other states to legitimize it, we're basically throwing our fundamental argument that this is the New Hampshire authority right out the window. And we shouldn't do that. We should support the underlying bill. We should give it another chance. There's a lot of support and a lot of momentum behind it. I think it might be able to pass this time around. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Belcher. Representative Mannion, I see you shaking your head in the affirmative. Now, he is speaking against your amendment, and I'm looking at your body language, and you're shaking your head. So you didn't ask to speak, but I'm going to ask you to respond, if you would, because I don't want to be confused here.
I love everything he just said. The problem is, I know that if this bill goes to the Senate, we have more allies on the other side that I think will vote for it. I just don't think it's going to pass in its current form. They're going to do the same crap they did last time, interim study, then they're going to speak 5 words to it on the Senate floor, and it's going to die a slow death. And the way I see it is, even if we don't, like, the bill won't go into effect immediately. It gets signed by the governor. We have to wait for 5 states to sign on. I understand that it breaks down the state sovereignty because we're cooperating with other states. I understand that. I wholly agree, but I'm also trying to be more pragmatic. I'm very stubborn, but in this case, after having many debates and arguments and phone calls, I actually think that this is the best path towards victory for New Hampshire alone. Otherwise, we're backbenching, waiting for some other bigger state to pass it first, because that is the first question we have heard time and time again. I hear in all these other states, it's just like, well, has any other state passed this yet? And if the answer is no, whoever that chair is of that other state, they're like, well, then we're not going to pass it. So if we pass it, even if it isn't technically in effect, it's a proof of concept that it's possible, and that some state is willing to stand up for their militia and the men that are serving. I'm more than happy to talk about that contract thing when we get to the actual bill, though.
Thank you, Representative. I want to be careful about getting too much. I want to focus on the amendment, although I appreciate everything that I've heard, and some of this we'll certainly come back to. Also, Representative, because some senators may watch this on YouTube, I caution you about using the word crap when we're talking about the other body. So anyway, and again, the essence of the amendment is very short. It basically is calling for this to not take effect until 5 other states have brought this into effect. That's the nub of the amendment. And there's a lot that we will get into beyond that. Anything else on the amendment? Representative Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify the parliamentary situation. Representative Mannion moves ought to pass. Representative Rollins seconded, which allows us to consider amendments. Representative Mannion subsequently moves amendment 3007H. I do not recall that being seconded. So we should be on the second motion. Did I miss that?
Thank you, Representative Smith. I spoke with Representative Mannion about the protocol and the procedure, and he moved ought to pass on the amendment on the bill as amended. So then he introduced the amendment. You have the number, seconded by Representative Rollins. So from your experience, and I know you have some, you're saying we need 2 motions before?
Yes. The ought to pass motion allows you to consider amendments. Now we're doing that. So the second motion that should be noted in the record is Representative Mannion moves offers amendment 3007H. That also must be seconded before we can vote on it.
Okay, thank you for that. So to be clear, Representative Mannion has.
If it helps, I'll second it.
Do we need to vote on the
Do we need to do the underlying bill first?
No. The motion, the measure has been introduced, and the motion has been ought to pass, and that initial motion was Representative Mannion, seconded by Representative Rollins. And now subsequent to that, we want to amend, before we take up the larger measure, we want to take up your amendment, which you've introduced, and Representative Smith has seconded. So we should be good, Madam Clerk?
On the amendment and then the ought to pass as amended motion.
Right. The vote that's going to come up is going to be now on the amendment.
Right, and if the amendment passes, then the initial motion becomes ought to pass with amendment 3007H. If the amendment fails, you still have the ought to pass motion that was made initially.
Correct. So if or when if the amendment does not pass, we will take up the original measure. If the amendment passes, we will take up OTPA. Any other questions, comments, or anything on the amendment? Representative Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention that I appreciate the addition of this amendment. I think that it reduces some of my concerns about the underlying bill, mainly in that with us being like geographically a smaller state, I worry about what that might do financially, or in addition to the continuation of the Pease Air National Guard base there. So I appreciate the amendment, and I think that it's a good addition.
Thank you, Representative Lloyd. Protocol-wise, I do have to point out that a sub generally cannot second a motion. So for our clerk's sake, to make sure we have everything the way it's supposed to be, I'm going to look for someone other than Representative Smith to be the official seconder of the amendment.
I will discipline myself later.
And Representative Gagny?
I will second.
Thank you, Representative Gagny. So Representative Mandelbaum, we have the correct motioners and seconders. Thank you for your initiative and enthusiasm, Representative Smith. And we want to have everything right because this is state federal. Other hands, anything else on the amendment? Yes, Representative, the representative from Dunbarton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering if the representative that introduced the amendment could speak to the selection of Massachusetts and Maine as far as if they approve the measure, why the state of New Hampshire frankly cares about what they do versus 5 other states.
As a refugee of Massachusetts, I am not a fan of that state. However, it's about geography and where we are in like across the North Atlantic. And a lot of the complaints that we heard, especially from SVAC, was concerns of the Pease Air Base and our mid-air refuelers. They're not going to take those and then move them to Michigan. That would kind of defeat the purpose of them being available for mid-air refueling over the North Atlantic. So I picked the 2 states that were closest to us. Maine has passed it out of a chamber or out of a committee before. Massachusetts has their first hearing, I think, ever a month ago. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But the idea is like because of the geographic proximity of them, that's why I picked the 2. The 5 is mostly because I think that's that's much more likely to happen than Massachusetts and Maine passing it, honestly.
Thank you, Representative Mannion. Follow-up, Representative Plant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with that being said, from our geographic standpoint and those types of units in Massachusetts and Maine, I would like to see maybe just the 5 states added throughout the whole country and not the measure for Massachusetts and Maine. I may be a bit biased, but the state of Vermont that has the only F-35 unit on the East Coast right now, as Massachusetts is transitioning, I would argue we might care what Vermont is doing versus what Massachusetts is doing, for instance. So I would just like to see that removed from the amendment if possible and just make it 5 other states.
Thank you for that, Representative Plant. And for full disclosure, you mentioned Vermont. You are or were a guardsman from Vermont?
As a former member.
So you no longer are serving in the Vermont National Guard. Okay. You would like to see the amendment amended, and I am going to let the process play out. Unless there's a second to that, and then we'll take that up. My hope is that there is not a second. I would like to have his amendment as introduced voted on before we amend the amendment. But if there is a second for that, and there is a second. Okay, so let's go to the question. Go ahead, Representative.
First, I want to thank Representative Belcher for this extremely articulate and well thought out defense of the bill. But not defense of the overall bill, but not the amendment. My question is to the proponent of this amendment is why did you limit to 5 states?
I saw it as 10% of the union. I thought it just of any number that made the most sense to me. Just start with something that's a sizable chunk of this nation. And it's also like we've passed at least that many like smaller houses, or sorry, one chamber or another. Over the several years that this is filed, it has passed 5 chambers more or less. So I think it's a doable objective.
Thank you.
That is a good question, as was Representative Plants. And just to be clear, we have a motion on the floor in the motion and the vote that is already in the works is to vote on the amendment, which is 30078, which is coming up. So Representative Mandelbaum, go ahead, please.
All right. So Representative Mannion, I just wanted to ask a point of clarification. So the way that I've heard some people in the room speak about this bill seems to be that we're talking about 5 additional states, but your amendment states that New Hampshire is one of them. So just to clarify, it's New Hampshire and 4 other states.
That's correct. Yeah, a
Okay.
total of 5
Thank you.
states, 10% of the union.
Thank you for that clarification. Anything else from anyone? Seeing no hands, Madam Clerk, the motion which has been seconded is to adopt the amendment to HB 104-FN. The amendment number is 30078 from Representative Mannion. When you are ready, and before we do the roll, I do want to make one more comment. When I was years ago a first-time representative, I was on Education Committee, and we had an executive session, and there was an amendment. And I always remember there was a representative from Dunbarton, as it turns out, or Bow, a Democrat. So I always remember she voted for the amendment. And then we took up the greater bill, and she voted against the greater bill. And I was new. So I asked her afterwards, I said, why did you vote for the amendment and then vote against OTPA? And she said she thought the amendment made the measure better. She didn't like either version, but if one was going to move forward, she wanted to see the better version, the amended version, move forward. So I always remember that. So that's one point I do want to make, is that if you think the amendment improves the bill, then you should consider supporting the amendment, even if in the end you may not support the underlying measure. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So Madam Clerk, you are ready, correct? So let's call the roll on the amendment motion. Yes. So we'll do voice. Yep.
All right. Representative Rollins.
Yes.
Representative Lundgren.
Yes.
Representative Smith.
Yes.
Representative Gagne.
Yes.
Representative Mannion.
Yes.
Representative Belcher.
No.
Representative Bennett.
Yes.
Representative Hemingway.
Yes.
Representative Plant.
No.
Representative Siebert.
No.
Representative Judy.
Not here.
Not here. Okay. Representative Lloyd.
Yes.
Representative Newsom.
No.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Budathaki.
No.
Representative Foss.
Yes.
Representative Manahar.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. Chairman Moffat.
Chair votes yes.
All right. So the motion is passed 12-5.
The amending motion passes 12-5, so that brings us now to an OTPA. Representative Mannion, if you would like to speak to the OTPA, which is on the floor now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to give everybody a good history of the last 2 years since we passed this thing. So Friday after we passed the Defend a Guard out of the New Hampshire House, now Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and former Trump Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany endorsed the bill on Fox and Friends publicly to millions of viewers. Weeks after passing Defend the Guard out of New Hampshire, Tower 22 in Jordan came under attack by militia. The Iraqi militia, they kept saying it was Iranian backed, but it was Iraqi militia who pulled the trigger. It killed 3 Army reservists and wounded over 20 National Guard members. Our National Guard had been at that airfield weeks prior to this. They had just come home. It could have been our men and women coming home in boxes. The U.S. and that Tower 22, its strategic purpose is to support the Al Tanf air blockade base inside of Syria, where we currently have boots on the ground. This entire concept of the AUMF structure was that okay, it's good enough. It's basically a war declaration. There has never been an AUMF that has passed from Congress or either body. It never passed out of the Senate to codify in law that it is legal for us to engage in anything in Syria. It has never passed. They tried to pass it under Obama in 2012. It never passed. We have boots on the ground in Syria. We have had men and women get wounded in combat operations in Syria. There's more on this. So because of our blockade at the Al Tanf blockade base, the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, was overthrown by HTS forces. HTS forces is a rebrand of Al-Qaeda. The leader of Syria now is Ahmed, they call him Ahmed al-Shara, but in a previous life he was known as Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. He had a $10 million bounty on his head until December of last year when the Biden administration just dropped it, because now he's in charge of an entire nation. It looks kind of weird for the U.S. to have a $10 million bounty on a country that, on a guy that we just kind of helped get in charge of a nation. I enlisted in 2004 to fight Al-Qaeda after what they did to us in 9/11. I didn't enlist to fight some despot and then take those same people that took down our towers and put them in charge of their very own nation in the Middle East. So now the Trump administration is working on discussions with al-Jalani to make that Al Tanf base permanent. We're very likely it's gonna be one of those like all those other like Kuwaiti, Camp Victory, and all those other bases in the region where we're just gonna have people there forever. And then another different. We're going to pivot from Syria. Despite the Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard's skepticism on the matter, the U.S. bombed Iran under claims that Iran was weeks away from completing a nuclear weapon. This is a claim that I have heard my entire adult life, that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear weapon. I spoke to this at length during my unanimous consent a few months ago. We have now entered into a defensive pact with Qatar. That, right after we bombed Iran, Iran then struck our bases in Qatar. If now we are entering into a defensive pact with Qatar, should something like that happen again, we are now bound by treaty to go to war with Iran. And this is to say nothing of Israel bombing Qatar. Comments made by the Trump administration, including the Secretary of War at the time of this bombing of Iran, says that regime change is not a thing that is off the table for Iran. We are posturing in the Caribbean Sea. Speaking of regime change, we are posturing in the Caribbean Sea right now and bombing boats of the nation of Venezuela. We, as of 2 days ago, are sending CIA assets into the country for unknown purposes. Me having watched a lot of regime change in the United States history, if you look up the United States history of regime change on Wikipedia, that thing is pages and pages and pages long. And a lot of those we get dragged into with boots on the ground. There's continued bombing of the Houthis, who, by the way, are fighting Al-Qaeda in Yemen. So we are bombing a force right now that is in direct opposition to the people that attacked us on 9/11. By the way, in Yemen, the USS Cole was attacked by Al-Qaeda. It wasn't attacked by the Houthis. We are currently negotiating a drawdown of our forces in Iraq, which would mean the closure of the Al-Assad air base, which sounds great, except all those forces are now going to move several hundred miles north, where they're going to be a lot closer to Iran, up in the Kurdistan region. Trump is currently eyeballing the Afghanistan Bagram airfield as a thing that we may return to. I don't know if you guys remember, but we didn't win the war in Afghanistan. There's peace in Gaza, but as of yesterday, if Hamas, this is a quote from Trump's Truth Social, if Hamas continues to, by the way, so this peace is going to be overseen by 200 Army soldiers that we've sent down there to monitor this. They started arriving yesterday. But the quote from Trump's Truth Social, if Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, capital D, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. There's no declaration of war here. There's not even an AUMF, but we're gonna go kill them, I guess. So now let's talk about like the disastrous effects of having National Guardsmen not here when we need them. I've talked at length about Hurricane Katrina. That was one of the impetus behind the bill's genesis. So the bill came about because of there was no Louisiana National Guard, no Alabama or Mississippi National Guards, because they were over in Iraq in 2005 when I was in Iraq, far away from the people that they enlisted to help protect, their neighbors and their state. Anyway, so fast forward. Helene rips through Appalachia. Helene tore through Tennessee and North Carolina. 700 Tennessee National Guard were deployed to Kuwait weeks before the hurricane came through this region. They were not available for rescue operations. Hawaii wildfires. National Guard unit had barely returned to be able to help there. In the case of California, LA fires, thankfully, Newsom had all of his men available. He was able to deploy 2,500 National Guard units to help with those wildfires. Imagine if they were sitting around in Al-Tanf base in Syria helping Al-Qaeda instead of helping their people back home. So, to clarify, somebody had mentioned the Peace Development Authority. I had written a letter to the head of the chair of the Peace Development Authority asking them if this hypothetical doomsday situation occurs where they're going to defund our entire National Guard, how does that affect your airfield? He told me that the only thing that the National Guard monitors there is strictly in charge of is the air traffic control and crash fire rescue. Should the units be, and he said, should the units be moved, he would easily replace them and it would not affect Pease at all. We have sent 3 letters to Secretary Hegseth, one from this committee, one through the Speaker's office, and one myself back channeling through the Concerned Veterans for America channel, which Hegseth had been in charge of. We have not heard anything back, which is disappointing. However, should the answer have been no, don't do this, Hegseth is not the kind of guy that would just let that ride. He would tell me, in no uncertain terms, do not do this, do not pass this bill. He's not going to play around. The fact that we haven't gotten a solid affirm is probably because he's fighting people inside the establishment. We already know that he's trying to cut some of the fat and a lot of those bad generals that made a lot of bad decisions during the global war on terror. I saw his speeches in front of the Pentagon. I've liked a lot of the stuff that he said about the brass that are down there. So there was a mentioning about contracts and how it violates contracts. I'll tell you one thing. So when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I chose that branch because I wanted to be the man that put the bullet in the head of bin Laden. I didn't know anything about special forces. I was a dumb high school kid, 18 years old. I was recruited at I think it was a Westover Air Base show. I did a lot of pull-ups, so they took my number. And then when they asked me, what would you like to do? You got a 99 on the ASVAB. What's your MOS? And I was like, I want to be infantry. I want to be the guy that pulls the trigger, that puts a bullet in bin Laden's head. I chose the Marine Corps because that would be, in my opinion, the people that would be first to fight. They would be kicking doors in, and they would be the ones to do that. I picked that MOS. I picked that branch. These folks that join the National Guard, I know they want to fight. I know they're willing to fight. I know they're here to defend their nation. But they chose that branch versus Marine Corps or active Army because they want to be close to home. They on the overpass on I-93 on my way in, there's a big advertisement on one of those, it's just a big flag that says, join the National Guard. They'll help pay for your college. Cool. Yeah, you're joining for college. That's right. Too bad. We're going to send you to Al-Tanf Air Base where you're going to get rocketed by Iraqi militia because we're supporting Al-Qaeda in that region. I don't know about you guys, but if I were a young kid right now and I was seeing like the foreign policy, I would be asking guys like me that went through the global war on terror and saw like how, I was promised that I would go fight Al-Qaeda, and I was promised I would go fight bin Laden, and I ended up doing regime change in Iraq for nothing. I'll tell you this. If any kids come up and ask me, it's like, hey, you joined the Marine Corps. Like, what do you think about me? And I'll be like, make sure that our house is in order in DC before you sign on that contract. Like, don't put your life on the line for this U.S. foreign policy where we are in bed with Al-Qaeda in some nations and bombing them in others. Like, don't die for this. And at that, I'm going to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Sponsor. Representative Seibert, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have a couple of statements in response to that. First of all, I've heard the quote that it doesn't matter if it is true as long as it is convincing. So good job. But there are definitely a few discrepancies in that. These Katrina conspiracies that keep getting perpetuated in regards to the National Guard are ridiculous. A lot of it actually has to do with the fact that giving the governor to governor permission became difficult in that process, which they did change one of those after then, actually, in regards to that in the ways of needing to get governor's permission for a state of emergency. Also, the levees broke, so it's another reason you can get a lot of people in there quicker. They weren't equipped for that at the time. But I just have to add that, ultimately this bill needs to consider the people it directly affects. And I know you assume you're doing that when you're like, oh, we're going to protect them by having them not go to war, or unnecessary war. But, people join the military for all different reasons. They also have very different experiences. And not all of those are negative. So I feel like you're painting a whole picture of a doom and gloom situation unfairly, quite frankly, which is obviously you're advocating for your bill. So that would be the case. But, ultimately, when people sign a contract, they do know what they're getting into. We've heard this from many National Guard members, actually, as of recently. So, yeah. I don't know. We have a member right now in the House who has served 2 tours, and he's against this legislation because it is ultimately not what they want. And I see people like shaking their heads, but I don't know. Have you talked to those people who are having the positive experiences? Or everyone has a negative experience? Because my husband did. But people do know what they're getting into. And what are we going to start saying, that people can't sign a contract to be a firefighter because it's a dangerous job and they could die in the line of duty? So that's kind of where I am with that. And that's what we need to think about. So
Thank you, Representative. At these exec sessions, we want to give maximum latitude to speech, and then we're going to do that. And I want to see us continue to keep this as respectful as we can. And I think we're doing okay. I know this is an emotional issue for many of us who have some personal skin in the game. Other hands, other comments? Representative Bennett.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment. I first of all want to thank those of you who have served in any kind of capacity in the military. And I personally did not. My father was in the National Guard when he was just started out at 18, whatever, probably. And he didn't go to college. He ended up I think he was drafted actually back then. And my son went into the Army because he had the same mentality of this colleague here. And I'm a mom, so I told him, exactly what you said, look at who the leader is, look at what you would be doing, that kind of thing. And he kind of had the same experience where he wanted to do something, to help fight for freedom. And he ended up in a whole different situation. And he kind of did. And then when he got out, he had to start over because his entire mentality was, I want to serve my country. And so now he's doing something else. But all that to say that the reason we're here is because it is a very, even in my own mind, I understand the mentality of they sign up, they want to do whatever it is they are asked to do. But on the other hand, a lot of times young people don't know what that means. And it is our job to make the best decision on behalf of others. And I appreciate the fact where you're saying if you join a branch where for sure, like the Marines, that's going to be a tough job, and most likely you're going to be in the most dangerous situations. And as the National Guard is more, yes, we're in military, but we want to stay close to home and possibly go to college. I also lived at a time where a lot of people joined the National Guard or any branch to go to college. And then when they were called up to go to a desert, they were shocked because we hadn't had anything. But personally, I knew if I signed up, I was going to be signing up. And that is the mentality. So in my mind, I like the differentiation where if someone does join the National Guard, they do have our a sense of protection that they would be called at a time of war. And I like the explanation of that is Congress's duty, and it's not really our duty even. And so I appreciate all the comments, and I appreciate the chair's comments as well, is to be careful that we don't make judgment of others, but that we just state our own opinion.
Thank you, Representative Bennett. Other thoughts, other hands? Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say briefly, I continue to support this bill. I will be voting in the positive in the affirmative. And I would just clarify that Hegseth supported this bill as recently as about 8 months ago, publicly. But I would not expect him to publicly come out and endorse this at the moment because he's now serving as a Secretary of War. And while he's wearing the uniform, I don't believe he thinks, and generally I don't think it's the purpose of somebody in uniform to be lobbying for legislation. It's a different duty that he presently has. But we have every indication that he supports this legislation. Thank you.
Other hands? Representative Seibert.
This is one point I really wanted to make, is that it is up to all of us to really hold our leaders accountable. And when we vote every 4 years, we need to question the person in charge and make them sit down and answer directly the questions that we have. And ultimately, a lot of this is on our shoulders to do that, because that's what will ultimately make the change that is needed in any case, and at least make sure things are legitimate or done legitimately. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I voted for the amendment, and I appreciate the amendment, and it lessens my concerns, I still have underlying concerns on the bill itself that I still cannot get past. The main piece of it is the benefits question that Representative Seibert has kind of touched on. What does this do for any contracts for our guardsmen who have since retired? Does that cut them off from any benefits that you foresee? Does that stop the currently serving guardsmen from meeting their contract for years of service or for their benefits through the VA? So what does that do in that regard? Additionally, we're looking at some arguments of a potential for Pease Air Force or Peace Air National Guard Base to have a potential closure, which would affect at least 10,000 New Hampshire jobs. In addition to that, it would also affect our economy with those jobs and any income that comes out of having Pease Guard Base. So that is why I still have concerns about the underlying legislation that I just cannot get past. However, I do appreciate the amendment. Thank you.
Anything else?
Oh, one more thing. Sorry.
Representative Seibert.
I
Go.
have a lot to say today. So just to piggyback real quick off hers, and then I'm done. I just wanted to say that they did almost decommission Pease Air Force Base at one point, and really ultimately the refueler saved that. So I feel like just automatically going, oh, they wouldn't do that, is kind of a really strong assumption to make in the face of such a detrimental decommission again. Also, on top of that, you say that it wouldn't, well, I saw that head, nodding or whatever, shaking in regards to people's benefits, but that's something we truly need like proof of. We need to see on a piece of paper that this would not, directly from the National Guard itself. We can make all these assumptions and guess, well, that wouldn't be practical, but that isn't the proof of how we take care of our citizens and leave that in the end with voting on this. At least it's not for me. That's not comfort. So I just wanted to state that before everybody votes.
Thank you again, Representative. Yes, Representative.
Manahar.
Representative Menahar, welcome.
Thank you. Again, thank you for your passionate advocacy for this particular issue. I'm in complete support of this because I come from a military family in India, and the National Guards folks who I kind of volunteer for that, they go in with completely different expectations. And so I also like the fact that this strips away the executive authority. So I'm coming from a different angle. However, the unintended consequences of this bill is what bothers me. And it says the act shall take effect 60 days after passage. I think with that, I'm not in favor of supporting this bill because that's just a little too short. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Menahar. Go ahead and respond, Representative.
Yeah, that was the whole point of the amendment that we had. So like I'm gonna so the way that it seems to be written, so we have section 7 is now added at the end, which would say that this doesn't go into effect until 5 states total have signed off, or Massachusetts and whatever. So it's like the act itself goes into effect 60 days after passage, then gets overridden by this. Follow up?
Follow up.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. I still have issues with it with respect to I think the issues raised by the other two reps here, Seibert and Lloyd, that it's a little too dicey at the moment, the way it's going to affect our troops, our guardsmen. So I'm still not in favor of supporting this, but I like your passion.
Thank you, Representative. Other comments or hands? I'm looking. Seeing none, I have some notes that'll take a couple of minutes. Before I go through my notes and then before we vote, I want to point out to folks that I know are watching and will watch, folks who know our processes here in the legislature understand that typically when you come to an executive session, the two caucuses caucus and they have a plan and they know who's going to make motions and they know how they're going to vote. That's usually the case. I want to point out that that is not the case here. This is an authentic executive session where there are some undecided people. Still, I talked to them earlier today. And so this is a measure that is what we call a vote your conscience measure. And this is unusual. It's not usually the case. We often know how the votes are going to go. I do not know how this vote is going to go. So I want it to be clear. My friend, my vice chair to my right, already shared that he lost a son in Iraq, and that certainly influences his thinking and our thinking as well, if we listen to our colleagues. So I wanted to just point that out. This is not a foregone conclusion. We honestly do not know how this vote is going to go, which I think is okay. All right, so my notes, let me try to go through these quickly as the chair. And this is just said by Representative Menahar, I want to make it a point to recognize the efforts of Representative Mannion and the other sponsors and supporters of this bill. There's a couple that are here. The representative from Peterborough, representative from Derry are here, co-sponsors. This measure came to this committee last term as HB 229. And I was very moved by the testimony of the veterans who showed up and looked me in the eye and looked us in the eye and said what they wanted to say and how they felt about policies as related to sending people off to war. And should there be a declaration of war? That's the nub of this whole thing. So that bill last term came out of this committee without any recommendation. It was a 10-10 vote. And the sponsors and the supporters did a great job presenting the bill to the full House. It passed the full House. Many people were surprised. I think that's a testimony to the work that the sponsors and supporters did. Not only did they get it through the House, they got it adopted as part of one party's platform, not insignificant. And then HB 229 went to the Senate where it died. Now, HB 229 did have an FN, a fiscal note, in 2024 last term, but the projected costs were, quote, indeterminable. So it was all zeros on the fiscal note. So when there's a fiscal note with numbers, typically if it passes the House, it doesn't go right to the Senate. It goes to Finance Committee. So last term, when this passed the House, it did not go to Finance Committee because the fiscal note was indeterminable. So this term's version of Defend the Guard, HB 104, does indeed have a quantifiable fiscal note. It has numbers, and the numbers, the amount cited in the FN, in the fiscal note, is $55 million. That's quite a fiscal note. So if HB 104 passes the full House, we don't know. If it does pass the full House, it won't go straight to the Senate. It'll go, which is what happened last time with HB 229. So with HB 104, this bill today, if it, I don't know what's going to happen in committee. We're going to vote on it shortly. If it passes the House, it'll go to Finance Committee. It won't go to the Senate. And so the fact that there is a $55 million fiscal note, that is something that gets my attention. What is finance going to do with a $55 million fiscal note? And then if it goes there, the debate will be there. I know that the sponsor has said that the feds would never dare cut our funding. And he may be right. But to me, that's what they call a game of chicken. So the game of chicken is a kind of a high stakes, I dare you. And it's a pretty high stakes game. Now, as I said, there's a lot of veteran support for this measure from individual veterans, but the veterans establishment is pretty much aligned against this bill. SVAC, the State Veterans Advisory Committee, pretty much unanimously opposes it. Should we listen to them? Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's why they're there. There's however many people are on this SVAC. Now, the sponsor will argue that SVAC is not representative of everybody, and I think that's true too. National Guard itself opposes Defend the Guard. The hierarchy certainly does. Some refer to it as defund the Guard, not Defend the Guard, and they resent having their name officially on the bill as the, quote, Defend the Guard Act. And I think that's a fair point. If somebody introduced a bill and they call it the Moffett Act, for something that I wasn't necessarily in favor of, I wouldn't be pleased. Or the Mandelbaum Act for something that the clerk maybe wasn't opposed. Or the Mannion Act. If somebody said, I want to have this bill, I'm going to call it the Mannion Act, and because he's got a good name, it'll go through. So I understand that the Guard is not happy that their name is part of the name of this bill, and I think that's a fair point. Now, it's also been said that today, people who join the Guard or join a state militia didn't join to find themselves in the Middle East or whatever. And I feel compelled to speak to the notion that's been put out by the people who join the National Guard sign up not expecting to be sent into harm's way. It's already been touched on today. I believe people join the military, I did, for a variety of reasons, or all kinds of reasons, combination of reasons. Everybody's a little bit different. Representative Mannion shared why he joined, and he wanted to put a bullet in bin Laden's head, and he wasn't the only one. That was his reason. But I'm sure that there are some folks, as has kind of come up, that want to stay home. They join the Guard because they don't necessarily want to deploy. But they should never forget that when anyone signs up, they surrender some of their personal sovereignty. This gets into the contracts that came up earlier. If you sign up, you give yourself to your country, and that is what it is. And I also know some join because they want to learn things. They want to be part of a team. They want to serve their country. And so, yes, some of them want to go to war, as Representative Mannion already said. I commanded a Marine Corps Reserve unit. And when we were activated to go to the Persian Gulf, honestly, many of us, including me, wanted to go. We were excited. We want to ride to the sounds of the guns. That's what you want your military people to be. You don't want people in the military who joined up for education benefits, and then when we need them, they don't want to go. Which brings me to an old stigma that I want to take a minute to touch on here. When I was growing up, Vietnam hung over our heads every day, every month, every year. I'm looking around, and maybe Representative Gagne remembers. I know he does remember Vietnam. Maybe Representative Lundgren. I'm not sure how old Representative Lundgren is. The representative from Derry, yes, he remembers Vietnam. So many of you weren't around for that, but I want to say this. We still had a draft when I turned 18. And a whole lot of people didn't want to be drafted or sent to war. We don't have a draft now, but we did, as most of you know. Many people get deferments, student deferments, married deferments, whatever, where they were deemed physically unfit, bone spurs, whatever. But a common way to get out of going to Vietnam was to join the Guard or join the reserves. And a stigma came out of that I need to touch on, because generally speaking, for political reasons in the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson, the president, did not want to federalize the Guard. He did not want to activate the reserves for political reasons. So it was pretty much a active duty fight. There were a very, very few reservists and very, very few guardsmen sent to Vietnam for political reasons. Now, some of you, before somebody wants to point this out, New Hampshire did send a few guardsmen, a unit from the 197th to Vietnam. And on August 26, 1969, a week before they were to come back to New Hampshire, 5 of them from Manchester were killed by a mine. So that was the exception. So the point is that during Vietnam, the Guard and the reserves were seen as a haven for people who didn't want to fight. And that was a stigma. If they didn't want to go to war, they tried to join certain branches of the military, ironically. And that stigma negatively impacted recruiting as well as the image of the Guard and the reserves back in the 60s and 70s. Now, that all changed in the 80s with Desert Storm, because we migrated to a total force concept where the Guard and the reserves would no longer be havens for people who didn't want to fight, but full partners, as they are today, with our active component when national interests call for force projection to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait, to Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and all kinds of other places. Representative Mann mentioned Syria, well, and on. Which brings us to 9/11, which has come up today. So after we get smacked that day, and all of us are old enough to remember 9/11. You may not remember Vietnam, but I think everybody here remembers 9/11. So we get smacked, and we wanted to respond. We had to respond, and we did respond. People wanted to put on uniforms and fight back. We all remember where we were that day. I was in Concord. I was teaching at NHTI when that day happened. By the next month, I was back in uniform. I was at MacDill, working for General Franks at CENTCOM in the top secret war room. Who saw that coming? I wanted to be there, like Representative Mannion wanted to do something. So, and eventually I did end up in Afghanistan. And so did we need to stay in Afghanistan the way we did? That ended badly in 2021. Did we need to go into Iraq at all? Well, that's come up today, Iraq policy, and the prices that we paid for going to Iraq. And I do have to say that it's easy for us in 2025 to look back and condemn the actions or the missions of OEF or OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, in hindsight. But at the time, if you think back to 9/11 and the year after, every time I saw a plane, I saw a missile. And we were braced to get whacked again. Who knew? And so at CENTCOM, I was working there, went into Afghanistan, and then we were building up for Kuwait, putting people in Kuwait to go into Iraq. Why? Because we were still hurting, and we wanted to preempt or proactively do something that might prevent another 9/11. So that's a mentality from 2002. And so when folks look back and condemn the people who were involved with that, it's easy to do that from our perches today. But we need to remember what prompted them to do what they did in 2002, 2003. My feeling is that Defend the Guard acts, almost every state has one. They've come around because of these so-called endless wars with Americans in harm's way for debatable reasons. HB 104 certainly makes a powerful statement. Now, I'm on the NCSL Veterans Task Force. NCSL is a National Council for State Legislators. I was at their conference in Boston. Now, the head of the Massachusetts Guard, General Keefe, was there. He talked to people like me from all over the country, from committees like this, and he knows that Defend the Guard acts are everywhere. Almost every state has something in the works. So he said to us in Boston, he said, any state that passes Defend the Guard is going to destroy the National Guard in that state. General Keefe, again, any state that passes Defend the Guard is going to destroy the National Guard in that state. Now, he's obviously the head of the National Guard. He ironically lives in Pelham. As a quick aside, he's temporarily living in New Hampshire, General Keefe, the head of the National Guard, Massachusetts. So, of course, his arguments were that missions will change, money will change. We've already talked about that. So is he right? Do we want to, if we pass this, will it destroy our National Guard? Some people think so, some people think not. We're going to have a vote your conscience vote in a minute. So this bill, if it passes, will go to the Finance Committee, where it'll almost certainly, I don't see them passing a bill with a $55 million FN. But if it did, if it's passed the House again, it would go to the Senate, which I don't see them passing it. If it did pass the Senate, the governor would never sign it. So I think that the part of the point of this is that we have heard some wonderful testimony, people getting smarter, awareness is being raised about undeclared wars, unending wars, what should we do? I think that's important. And I think the two bills that we've spent a lot of time on have already served a big purpose in making people smarter or more aware of these issues, life and death issues. Now, I'd be very open to a resolution without naming the National Guard, resolution that shines a light on the issues of endless wars and what's the proper role of the Guard or total force in the mix. And I think a resolution is in the works. I think that there's an LSR that will probably come to this committee in January on this topic. But it's a resolution. It would not be a binding law, but it would continue the process of raising awareness about this incredibly important issue. So I've gone on a little bit. Again, this is a vote your conscience measure. I respect whatever choice committees make in this vote, which is about to happen. I cannot myself vote for HB 104. So thank you for your time on that. Before we go to the vote, are there any other comments? Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to speak really briefly to the fiscal note. So the job of OLS isn't to tell us what's going to happen. It's to pull out the worst sort of theory of law possible to find out what might happen. But the reality is the way that this is going to go down, if it were to be passed, is not what's in the fiscal note. What happens, as we see right now with the current administration, what happens when there is a conflict between a federal and state law or order? It goes to the courts. Because this would be a conflict between the state and the federal government, this is an original jurisdiction case for the Supreme Court of the United States of America. The Supreme Court has never weighed in on the Militia Act or the actual ramifications of making the National Guard into the militia and then authorizing the call up by the president solely. So what would happen is it would go one of two ways. It goes to the courts, and either the courts strike the law down, in which case we don't lose funding because the law is struck down, or the courts uphold it, in which case we don't lose funding because the courts upheld it. But the only way to get this before the courts is to create a conflict between state law and the federal law. And the only way that happens is with a bill. It does not happen with a resolution. Thank you.
Representative Seibert.
This was also, well, I mean, it's interesting you say that because now it really brings about more intent here. But, you know, it is not cheap. You have to have specialized attorneys to fight this on behalf of our state in the Supreme Court. And we already have multiple bills that were passed last time with that exact same intent. So using the state and the taxpayers as a conduit to fight these fights is extremely not beneficial and very for the taxpayers overall, which is exactly what everybody cares about right now. That's what I'm hearing on the ground. Doesn't matter whether people, I talk to everybody in my district, literally. It doesn't matter what letter they have behind their name. And so, you know, that it's an improper use of this court system, you know, especially when we still have these questions at hand, ultimately what it could affect, and just leave it up to that. And it does cost a lot of money for the state to fight those things in the Supreme Court. So we have to think about that price tag too.
So this is a free-flowing executive session, and I think I'm hearing a lot of good points. I want to be careful about touching on motive. It's something, or you mentioned intent, not motive, but I think your points are well taken. Representative Belcher, do you want to any piece of that you want to respond to, or are you good?
I would only mention that the reason that the courts exist is to adjudicate such things, and it's the responsibility of the state government to stand up for the rights of our citizens and state sovereignty where that is implicated. That's it.
Anything else? Okay. Seeing no hands, let's get to this, Madam Clerk. When you are ready, you can call the roll. The motion is OTP as amended on HB 104-FN. Just for our paperwork purposes, the original motion was Mannion, seconded by Rollins, and then to clarify, as we did before, the amending motion, the OTPA was Mannion, and the second was Representative Gagné. Okay, Representative Gagné officially was a second on that. So that's the measure that we are now about to vote on.
So the motion is ought to pass as amended. Vice Chairman Rollins?
Yes.
Representative Lundgren? No. Representative Smith?
Yes.
Representative Gagné?
No.
Representative Mannion?
Yes.
Representative Belcher?
Yes.
Representative Bennett?
Yes.
Representative Hemingway?
No.
Representative Plant?
Yes.
Representative Siebert?
No.
Representative Lloyd?
No.
Representative Newsom?
No.
Representative Mandelbaum votes no. Representative Budathaki?
No.
Representative Foss?
No.
Representative Manahar?
No.
And Chairman Moffett?
No.
All right, so the motion fails, 6 in the affirmative, 11 in the negative.
I would like to make a motion.
Motion has failed 11-6. Yes, Representative Siebert.
Sorry, I forgot when to do that. So I would like to make a motion for ITL.
Do we have a second?
I'd like to second.
Is that Representative Lloyd?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, our new motion is ITL, inexpedient to legislate, moved by Representative Seibert, seconded by Representative Lloyd. Representative Seibert, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I think I've already said enough. I think all my other comments explained it. So yeah.
Representative Lloyd, would you like to speak to your second?
No additional comments. Thanks.
Okay, the motion now on the floor is inexpedient to legislate on HB 104. Any other comments? Any hands? We've spent a lot of time on this. I see no hands. Then, Madam Clerk, when you were ready, this latest motion is ITL inexpedient to legislate on HB 104FN.
All right, for the motion ITL, Vice Chairman Rollins,
No.
Representative Lundgren. Yes. Representative Smith,
No.
Representative Gagne,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
No.
Representative Belcher,
No.
Representative Bennett,
No.
Representative Hemingway,
Yes.
Representative Plant,
No.
Representative Siebert,
Yes.
Representative Lloyd,
Yes.
Representative Newsom,
Yes.
Representative Mandelbaum votes yes. Representative Budasaki,
Yes.
Representative Foss,
Yes.
Representative Manahar,
Yes.
it was 10-6.
And the chair.
I'm so sorry. I always Representative Moffett.
We have to vote. We can't abstain, Madam Clerk, and I would vote yes to the latest motion.
All right. So the motion passes 11-6.
Okay, motion that the committee has adopted is ITL and HB 104. We will need reports. Representative Seibert, will you make sure that the majority report is taken care of?
Yeah. When would that be?
We have plenty of time on this one. I'll get with you on that. Representative Mannion, minority report?
Yes.
All right, so we will close the hearing on 104. We have one more measure, one more retained measure that we need to take up. We'll do that right now. Yes?
Can you give me 2 minutes?
Yeah.
I need to.
Can you give
Yeah.
me 2 minutes?
Yes, we'll take a 5-minute recess, 5 minutes, and then we'll start on 256. All right, folks, I think we're all back. Right, at this time, I would like to reconvene the committee to take up our other retained bill, which is a measure HB 256, an act establishing a committee to study the federal government's response to the 1967 attack on the USS Liberty. I wanted to read the title of the bill ahead of time. And for folks watching now or later, I look for a motion, this is all about something that happened in 1967. I remember it. I was in school at the time, and again, I think I know Representative Gagne remembers this. Probably Representative Lundgren, Representative Rollins. I'm not sure how old you are if you remember this, but this is.
I was in the area about a year.
Yes, Representative Gagne is a naval veteran, and so what happened in June of 1967 is the USS Liberty, U.S. naval vessel, was attacked by Israel, Israeli forces. This is during the Six-Day War in June of 1967, and the Liberty was almost sunk. There were a lot of men killed, a lot of men wounded. There was a significant New Hampshire presence on that ship. And the skipper, the captain of the ship, was awarded the Medal of Honor. So obviously that was a tragic event in our history. And whatever happens with this bill, just the fact that I'm talking about it, we're talking about it, people are learning about it, is a good thing, because we should not forget our history. So this has come up 2 times in our committee, and we have had people come to testify on this measure, on this bill, from all over the country, from Colorado, from Florida, survivors. Some of them have since passed away, who came to us pleading for us to move this forward so that a light would be shined and action taken. Now, they want the bill, and this is the second iteration of the bill, calls for a committee to study the federal government's response to that 1967 naval attack. So that's what this bill is all about. And we retained it for a combination of reasons. The previous bill, we explained why we retained that bill. And we also retained this bill. We're coming back to it now. So all that said, that's what the bill is about. I'm looking for a motion, and Representative Mannion is one of the sponsors. I'm looking to him for a motion, perhaps. Okay. I'm looking for a motion to Representative Belcher. We need a motion to get started here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move ITL.
Motion from Representative Belcher is ITL, an expedient to legislate. We do need a second.
I will second.
Representative Gagne seconds that. So, Madam Clerk, we have a motion of ITL made by Representative Belcher, seconded by Representative Gagne. Representative Belcher, thank you for your motion. Would you care to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, let me start by saying I witnessed some of this testimony, and I am not pleased with the manner in which many of these vets were treated, seemingly by our own government. I'm not happy with what happened and what they were told, that they're not allowed to speak or look into this or anything else in the aftermath. Not happy with it. My concern with the bill as presented lies in the mechanism for getting something done. Now, this calls for a study committee. I served on the COVID study committee here, and it's extremely difficult to get a full breadth of information and to really dig and verify that information, even on an incident that's only a few years old. I seriously doubt that we have that kind of investigative capacity. And even if we did come to some conclusion, we're extremely limited by the federal structure of our government and what we can do about it. So I think I would strongly prefer, and I support the concept of a resolution on a matter such as this, to urge our federal government to look into this, to reopen the investigation, to do necessary declassification so we can all get a look at what really occurred and what was done to these men and who did it. And I think it's time that these men get that resolution. It's just, I don't think we can deliver that for them here in this state, in this legislature.
Thank you for that. Representative Gagnon, you seconded the ITL motion. I know you're a naval veteran, and as I've pointed out more than once today, you were around in the 60s, and you were,
Yes, and
would
I'm
be
still
interested in
around.
your thoughts.
Even though I am a co-sponsor on this bill, because I could relate to the testimony. Some of them who testified last time are my age. I'm 81 years old. Some of them have passed away because they were older than 80 years old. My question at the time was, why did the Liberty, a spy ship, off the steaming, doing their job off the west coast of Africa, suddenly get new orders to deploy to a war zone off the coast of Israel during a war? And when somehow, I know what a flag, I was a signalman, so I know what a battle flag looks like. It's very visible. However, the Israelis attacked. And who gave the order for that Liberty to move to a war zone, a spy ship, unescorted? And when they called for air cover from I think in Italy, from the Air Force in Italy, and they were told to stand down. Why did the admiral come on board and say, "You can be honest with me, just pretend I don't have the epaulets on my shoulders"? And the men explained, gave their story, and I've been on ship, and I know there's no place to hide. When the bullets, I've never had bullets fly my way, but I can see that 3/8-inch steel plate on a destroyer. So a torpedo breaks it in half. So these guys were defenseless, and they took torpedo hits, they took air hits. PT boats were on their case. They killed, I think, like 36 died, and most of those were analysts who were below decks. Once you're below decks, you ain't getting out. And they were allowed to steam back to a port that was further away than a port was supposed to be. Where did the orders come from to say, literally, let these guys sink? It didn't come from the Israeli government. So I don't think a committee will solve anything here, but I'm understanding a resolution, I think, will have more clout to get to open up the files and find out who gave the order. I know there's a quote from the then president saying, "I don't care a couple of American lives. We got to take care of what's going on in Israel." To me, it's a U.S. thing. So open up the files through the resolution, please, and allow this to be put to rest. Maybe give the survivors and their children some closure as to what really happened there.
Thank you, Representative Gagnon. Representative Foss.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I couldn't agree more with the statements of the other representatives. And I, as I'm sure all of us were so moved by the testimony of the gentleman who spoke before us. And I know if everyone remembers, I asked one of them, "What is it that you want from this?" And he said, "I want an apology." And this committee wouldn't give him an apology. So I just think it does a disservice to these men to say we have a solution for them and then not give them what they feel they need and what they want.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Seibert.
I want to say that I did feel like when they came the first time around that we really gave them something. It might have been little, but of a bunch of them were saying over and over again when they got up to speak that about how honored they were to be here, and it was such a relief for them to finally be in front of an official committee of some form, you know, at any government level, whatever, to be able to tell their story and have it officially on record, especially like the chairman said, because a few have since passed away. And so I really feel like ultimately, well, of course, it would be great for them to have more, and that would be, I think that in their perfect world type thing, I feel like we really gave them a lot by sitting here and listening to their story, which was the least we could do. But I was personally touched by that. So, if anything, but I think an appeal would be great. So, yeah.
Thank you, Representative Mannion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to be voting against the ITL simply because when these men came before us and they spoke, they understood they were under the gun. They were basically justifying the existence of this committee that we would be looking to form. They told their stories and they were heartbreaking. I feel like there's a lot more that these men can get into, and I did draft a House resolution that will, what I believe the outcome of this committee could potentially be, but I do feel like that's sadly may fall on deaf ears down in DC. So these men are aging. We've lost another one this summer. And I think giving them another chance to come and speak before an official committee and not relegated to like the dark corners of the internet on podcasting, to have the men come and speak before a committee in a formal setting on the record to give detailed accounts of everything that they saw may be the last chance these men have.
Thank you, Representative Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo a lot of the sentiments here. I sincerely appreciate the stories of these gentlemen who came to testify for us. My concern here was how we were addressing that, and I've always said that I would like to see this as a resolution, simply because I don't believe we have the jurisdiction to investigate this, because we don't have access to the type of knowledge that we would need to, or the security clearances that we would need to open up an investigation, even at a committee level. So I will be ITLing this, but I really sincerely do not want to see this go unaddressed. And I absolutely will go on record for saying that I will follow up with our federal delegation after this.
Thank you, Representative Budasaki.
Just to be brief, I want to say that truth matters, even though it is uncomfortable. I can support any efforts to get this truth out. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, I side with Representative Mannion on this. With respect, I'm going to support this measure because of a personal reason. My father was in the military. He was in the British Army at the time, the Indian Army, but it was the British Army, and he had a horrible time in Burma fighting the Japanese hand-to-hand combat. His platoon was caught behind enemy lines, and it was brutal. And something happened that even our family is not able to discuss. My mother she's 98 now. She doesn't talk about it. It's all zipped up. Something happened that the British government did to their own troops that led to this trauma. And so I kind of have a personal stake in your sentiment that yes, we don't have the capacity we don't have the wherewithal to get all the things we need to investigate, but I'd like to side with, and I want to side with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Manahar. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that out of any measure, proposed bill, resolution, whatever, the fact that there's a hearing, an executive session, it's on YouTube, just you mentioning your background in Burma, I mean, people watching this pick up on things, and there's learning that happens. I was an educator. So there's value to what you just said and to what we're doing here. Other comments or hands? Representative Rollins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I agree with everything Representative Mannion has said. There's no sense being redundant, and I will be voting no on the ITL.
Thank you, Representative. Other hands? I have a quick thought. And commissions, they take a while. They got to be approved by the legislature, and then they have to be convened. The members have to be identified, then it has to be convened, and then it's a long process. I know it's probably no secret. Our House leadership wants us to be careful. There are many proposals for committees and study committees or commissions, and they want us to be very careful about what we commit to. And as has already been said, at this point, 68 years later, would the time, energy, effort, wherewithal that a committee would put into this come up with anything new? I think there's value, as I've already said, to just talking about it because it's important history, especially in that part of the world with what's going on today. But committees take a while. So it's been brought up several times about a resolution that I guess is in the mix as an LSR. Very likely would come to this committee in January, and we would come back to this. Now, I see the value. Resolutions are all different. I don't mind resolutions. As I said, I think resolutions raise awareness, they teach, and they sometimes prompt action. Again, not everybody's a fan, but I think that if we did have a resolution come to this committee, and if we pass it, and if the House passed an HR on this subject, and we asked our federal delegation to take some substantive action to shine a light, raise awareness on this. Now, our federal delegation, as some of you know, maybe all of you know, is all on the blue side. So if we do pass this resolution, if it comes to us, then I would be looking to our friends on the blue team to who may know some of our federal delegation members better than some of us, to ask them to take a serious look at this and do something in DC so that maybe they can help get some answers. But I don't think a committee is the answer, and I would support the ITL motion. Other Representative Smith, please.
I realize that amendments are out of order because the motion pending is ITL, but is there one? Because you can't pass this as it is because the report is due before the committee is formed.
Yes, I see that came up earlier. I was talking with our researcher about that, and that is a so the bill was retained. We're taking up the bill that was retained. The date on it is problematic. We talked about that earlier, and quite frankly, we have a motion on the floor. If ITL passes, then that concern is moot. If it doesn't pass, then we may have to recess and look for an amendment to change the timing. So, does that kind of answer your concern? Yes. Other Representative Seibert.
I just wanted to bring up, because I know folks are like, we need to do something, but it's not real. So these men have come before us twice now and traveled across the country, and many of them are aging and all of that. And I mean, that's fine. I think our big concern here is that they're being brought forward, being told that they have to convince us to form a commission and all of this. But ultimately, I think what many of us have come to the conclusion of is realistically, like we said, we can't force the government to hand over this information. I guess we could do another suit in the higher courts or whatever. But again, I think it is extremely harmful and wrong to give these men false hope when there is none. Or when we don't know we can do that. Sometimes that is the most damaging of all. And frankly, it's kind of cruel based on what they've been through. But I can vouch for the fact. I say that I would support the ITL, but with the full intent, and I've seen that the the resolution is up on the LSR list. And so with the full intention of supporting that and going the extra mile with it, and Crystal here has been very passionate about it, my fellow representative. We were even going to go further to reach out to like SBAC and make sure they're receiving all the services they can. I know sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult if you're under gag orders, or if the information about your case is involves a lot of like the you can't talk about it kind of thing. And so it can be hard for them to get services to, therapy, or even maybe a group therapy with them on Zoom together or something like that, for that to be facilitated. So we want to also go to the extra mile to make sure they're receiving all of those types of services in their case. So with that said, I just wanted to say that and fully explain the intent of, fully seeing the resolution through.
Thank you for that, Representative. Other hands, other comments? Seeing none, at this time, the motion is ITL and expedient to legislate on HB 256. When you're ready, Madam Clerk, you can call the roll.
All right, on the motion of ITL, how do you vote? Vice Chairman Rollins.
No.
Representative Lundgren.
Yes.
Representative Smith.
Yes.
Representative Gagne.
Yes.
Representative Mannion.
No.
Representative Belcher.
Yes.
Representative Bennett.
No.
Representative Hemingway.
Yes.
Representative Plant.
Yes.
Representative Siebert.
Yes.
Representative Lloyd.
Yes.
Representative Newsom.
Yes.
Representative Mandelbaum votes yes. Representative Budathaki.
Yes.
Representative Foss.
Yes.
Representative Manahar.
No.
Chairman Moffat.
Yes.
Right. So the ITL passes 13-4.
13-4 ITL. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Representative Belcher, would you help us with the majority report, being the writer that you are? Will there be a minority report? Any of the four no votes want Representative Mannion? Thank you. So Representative Mannion will do a minority report in opposition to his friend Representative Belcher's majority report. That's all we have with that. So I will, at this time, thank everybody for coming in. Good to see you. And thank you, if Jennifer, for whoever put this room together in this new building. It's amazing what they've done. Thank you for that. And I'm sure by the time we learn to love it, we'll have to move again. But so thank you all.
See you next year.
I know. See you in Veto Day.
Next year.